We start. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should start. If that's okay, I guess we just take the executive action and begin and allow people to come in. Thanks, Renzo. I think we have a couple of things we have to say with respect to the medium and what we're doing in this public forum. So Renzo, could you give us a quick update?
Yes, thank you, Patrick. First of all, welcome. And before we get officially started, we have a couple of very important announcements. First of all, this is a public webinar. So for the interest of the public, we are recording this event. Therefore, speakers and participants may be filmed. The video recording will be archived according to GDPR compliance and will be used for research purposes or helping advance the mission of the GCSP. So just for you to be aware of that. Also, please keep yourself muted when you're not participating to avoid background noise. And if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the chat. But also be aware that the comments and the questions written in the chat are recorded, but they will be deleted to ensure confidentiality. And before we get it started as well, thank you for coming. And we have a very diverse group of participants today. We have people from the private sector, from academia, from parliaments, from permanent missions, from the civil society organizations and NGOs as well. So very diverse pool. And so we thank you for making the time to join us today.
Thanks, Renzo. There's a couple of people waiting to get in, and it's hard to do two things at once. So
yep,
let them in, and yeah, thanks a lot. My name is Patrick Sweet, and I'm co-director of the Geneva Leadership Alliance. And this is the second webinar in a two-webinar series. And the theme of this series, which you may have seen online, which may have attracted you, has to do with the fact that crisis will bring legacy. How we lead now is going to impact our own leadership. It's going to impact others around us. And if we lead an organization, it'll impact our organization for a decade. And it sounds pretty ominous, but the fact of the matter is crisis brings legacy with it. Every organization has some kind of origin story. And whether you think about Apple and Stephen Jobs or ICRC and Geneva, that legacy, that origin story is often punctuated throughout time by crises, either crises in the organization or crises at large, which is really what we're facing right now. An example of that is an organization that came to us some time ago, the Geneva Leadership Alliance, which I'll explain in a minute, for some assistance in developing some leadership development strategy. And they had some very clear ideas about what they wanted to do, and they sounded good. And we said, can we go in and check some assumptions and have a couple of focus groups and talk to people? They wanted to become more agile as an organization. And we said, well, let's go ask some questions about what's getting in the way. And when we asked questions about what's getting in the way of the agility that they wanted to have, we learned that upwards of 8 years prior to that, that organization had experienced a severe existential crisis for itself. It was a financial catastrophe. There were some heads that rolled, if you will. There was some very strong action taken, probably needed to be taken. But there we were, 8 years later. The organization had survived its crisis, and people were talking about being less secure in speaking up. And so that legacy was strong, it was in the culture, and it was 8 years later, and it was getting in the way of the outcomes that they wanted to be more agile. And so when we were asked to come in and say, okay, how can we help people learn to be more agile? We said, you're gonna have to take a step back. And you're going to have to acknowledge some things that are happening here that are in the way of agility. I think people actually might know how to be agile. And I was really struck by how that happened, how that evolved. I have been calling in from Stockholm. I've been working in leadership development for 30 years. As you can hear, I'm a North American, and I've seen some crises over a period of time. And I've seen this legacy repeat itself, where people had these punctuation points in their lives or organizations that recast their origin story. And I think this acting out again in North America today. There are very many legacy issues that have not been resolved that reoccur. And that happens around the world, not just in North America. So what we do today, how we lead through this crisis is going to impact us for decades to come. That's the theme of this. And so this is an effort from the Geneva Leadership Alliance, which is an alliance between the Geneva Center for Security Policy, most of whom you probably know because that's how you got here, and the Center for Creative Leadership. The Center for Creative Leadership is where I come from. I'm co-director of the alliance. And the Center for Creative Leadership has been around, and the two organizations bring to this space some 70 years of experience in leading in their particular areas of expertise, GCSP in peace and security, and the Center for Creative Leadership across a number of sectors, including public, private, and nonprofit sectors. So we decided to bring these two organizations together and learn about what it is that we can from each other and what we can bring to our community. And so that started some 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, and still goes strong, and this is part of that effort. Today what we're gonna do, and I'm gonna lay all this out, and then we're gonna move forward into how we're gonna do this. But we're gonna have an introduction, I'm 5 minutes through it, then we're gonna talk about what is resiliency, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And then we're going to talk about how to strengthen that. And we have Fleur Hayworth with us, who is a colleague at GCSP, and I'm very humbled that she's here. She brings a tremendous amount of experience, and she'll introduce herself more later. But she's going to take us through some of these ideas about how to strengthen resilience for ourselves, what's about it, and how to do it for others. And then we'll all work together and wrap it up. I want to give a moment here to say, use the chat. We're going to have some breakout groups. We're going to ask you some questions. And my role will be to watch and monitor the chat and see that we can bring in voices as they come. I don't know how many are here now, but the more there are, the better, and the more difficult it becomes for me to include everybody. So bear with me as I try to highlight what is really said in the chats. I'm going to move forward and say that, you know, when we ask ourselves what pressures are facing us, and we've done this by sending out a questionnaire with some 2 simple questions. If you look on the right, you see the words that come back. This is a word cloud where the size of each word identifies how many people use that word. And so we asked the question, what are you challenged by now? And what do you wish you understood better? And you can see this cloud of things that are on people's mind in this COVID crisis. Everything from balance, everything from our job, everything on the right-hand side to what people are doing, our business, our team, how do I set priorities? It is really, really difficult. And depending on where you are in your organization, you'll be focusing on where you are in your life. You might be focusing on straight out survival. You might be focusing on what does this mean for my organization, my team. You might be focusing on what does it mean for my family. And in short, it's very disruptive. Things are happening rapidly. They seem unpredictable. They're full of tensions. Do I look at what I need to do today? What about the long term? How do I balance long term and short term? And they're very tangled. What leads to what? How can COVID actually impact the way we work in our team? Well, it does immediately. We can see by this medium. And so with all of this kind of struggle, it puts us in a situation where we have to figure out how to be strong and how we can find within ourselves resilience to move forward. And so I would just remind us that we're in the middle of what we would call a marathon as opposed to a sprint. We're in the middle of something that requires that we can pace ourselves and build our resilience of ourselves and those around us. And that was such a core piece when we asked people that we said, let's have a second here. I'd like to turn it over to Fleur. Fleur, thank you. Your presence here is really good, and I'm really excited that you're joining us, and I'm going to do what I can to support you. And I would ask you to take over the slides now and introduce yourself and move us into where we're going for the rest of this webinar.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and I'm really delighted to be here with you. So I'm responsible for gender and inclusive security at the GCSP, and I'm also responsible for the Gender Champions Secretariat. So as you may have gathered from those words, I do have an interest in gender equality, but also more broadly in inclusion. And being in a centre of knowledge creation at the GCSP, what I'm really passionate about is how can we make that more the lived reality so that we bring these best practices into our daily lives in a manageable way, and that we deliver on what so many of us are trying to do to advance, whether it's peace and security, sustainability, or even just better ways of doing things within our work and within our lives. And resilience is a particularly precious topic to me as a parent, as a professional, and just balancing the dilemmas and the challenges we face in that journey called life. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some insights with you today, and I hope they will be of use to you. And as Patrick said, we're going to try and make it interactive, both with the chat and with a short breakout room. So please be prepared for that. We hopefully won't be asking you anything that makes you uncomfortable, but we do ask you to participate as much as you can to get the most out of it. So part one, resilience. What is it? How are you feeling right now? And what do we know about stress and the mind-body connection? Because neuroscience has a lot to tell us now. So if we start, first of all, with resilience, what is it? As Patrick said, it may mean different things to different people, and you may have different ways of approaching it. But when we look at it in this session, we're going to be moving around this concept of individual resilience rather than organizational resilience. Organizational resilience can mean this core purpose and integrity, which is very relevant. But today we're going to focus on increasing your ability to show up as your best self, including during difficult times. And many of us may be in difficult times. It may feel like the earth is arid. But the point is that we are amazing human beings. We adapt. And as Patrick said, to be able to adapt, we need a certain environment within ourselves and around us to be able to do it. And so we're hoping we're going to be able to share with you some ways that you can stretch like that spring, but not snap, so that you can really give yourself and embrace these challenges. It feeds into what Patrick and Peter mentioned in the last webinar, this growth mindset, that our brains are actually more like muscles than skeletons, what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. So we know we can adapt. Okay, so why is it so important right now? Well, even before coronavirus, we know there was a lot of stress, there was a lot of burnout. In fact, the World Health Organization has recently classified burnout as a disease arising from chronic workplace stress and feelings of energy, depletion, exhaustion, mental distance from the job, or just negativity and cynicism, and it all leads to reduced professional efficiency. And depression alongside that is actually one of the leading causes of disability, affecting 264 million people per year. So even if it's not affecting you, it's likely to be affecting someone you know. And so being aware of this and strategies to help enhance resilience is really important. In coronavirus, as we've all experienced, it's caused such disruption, and particularly for those who don't have supportive environments around them, whether they're in difficult family circumstances or other, this can really add to the complexity. And those leading organisations, as Patrick has said, have suddenly got a whole new amount on their plates, adding to the pressure that they're facing. So what I'd like you to think about next are a few of these questions in relation to you. Okay, so this is a true or false checklist, and this is sort of your check-in with yourself. So if you've got a pen and paper, you may want to write a few notes down. So firstly, when you get upset, it usually takes a long time to recover. So for yourself, when I get upset, it usually takes me a long time to recover. True or false? I find myself replaying negative or stressful incidents in my mind long after they have happened. True or false? I am easily distracted and find it hard to focus on one thing for very long before I'm thinking about something else. It's sometimes hard for me to put things in perspective. I tend to worry a lot about things that are beyond my control. It's hard for me to find time to exercise most days of the week. I find it difficult to eat healthily most days of the week. And finally, it's hard for me to get 8 hours of sleep every night. So that's a little check-in we're doing for yourself, and we'll be addressing each of those areas during the course of the rest of the webinar. And before we do that, we'd like to give you the opportunity to get to know a few people on this call, and to start a bit of reflection, which is really important about when you recognise these triggers. So we've given you some suggestions, but there is many more. We know you want to be your best self, showing up at work with all your strength and energy and vision for what you can achieve. But we know that when we're depleted, it's not quite so possible to do that. So we're going to invite you to go into small breakout groups just for 10 minutes. 3 people in the group. So as Patrick said and Renzo said, it won't be recorded. So you can speak in confidence with one another, and we ask you to respect that with one another so you don't go disclosing it afterwards. Brief introductions, and then we invite you to finish these sentences. I know I need to recharge when I recognise when my colleagues need to recharge when they. Okay, so you can also share your thoughts from the breakout group in the chat. And so Renzo, if you could send everyone into breakout groups, please. Thanks a lot.
You'll be getting a message now to join.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that was useful. If you have any thoughts to put in the chat about the signs that you know when in yourself or what you see in others when it's time to recharge, that would be really helpful. For my part, I know that when I'm losing patience and I cut people off, or I'm quite short with people, I know that I've either spent too long in front of the screen or I'm not taking the time out that I need to recharge. Somebody said to me, it's when you've been sitting in the same place for ages, oh my goodness, it's been hours and I still haven't got up and moved. You know you need to recharge. And in terms of this pandemic that we're experiencing and the disruption that we're experiencing, I think we're entering phase 2. You know, we're beyond the first phase of reaction, but we're now in this phase where we need to think, hang on a minute, what are my daily practices? Am I creating the space and the time I need to do the things to care for myself? Because if we don't put that oxygen mask on first to ourselves, like in the aeroplane, we won't be able to support others, and we won't be able to meet the needs of others if we can't meet those needs of ourselves first. So does anyone else want to share anything else? Patrick, do you have anything to add? You're on mute, Patrick. I'll just unmute.
Oh, I'm on mute. Oh, good.
Yeah, you're back. You're back with us.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I lose focus. You know, I do things like I'm standing now because of the very thing you said. I set up my space because all this time on the screen, I have to stand, and that gives me energy. And I got to that awareness from sitting down for hours. So yeah, same thing. Absolutely. Anyone else?
Well, we had a group of two, I think, a breakout session of two. And I think
Yeah.
what we said was that I know I need to recharge when you mentioned this, hard to focus on priorities. But when all of a sudden I find myself overwhelmed with work that I normally do. And as relating to the colleagues, we discussed that suddenly colleagues that are absent-minded, distracted and disoriented, or not delivering on the deadlines, we know that they need to recharge. Yeah, that's what we discussed with Ida. I thought, were we the only breakaway group? Because we were only two.
No, I think we were actually in two, but it's as long as it worked and everybody was in a group, then that's great.
Okay.
Ingrid has something. Ingrid has something to say. She raised her hand.
Yeah, thanks for giving me. So I think my body actually gives me signs when I'm not hungry anymore. That's because I'm full of many other things, and there is no space for food.
Yes.
And also when I start having headaches, is again my body asking me to slow down, announcing that there is too much going on. So I found that listening to my body is really important. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ingrid. Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to look more about the mind-body connection. And before we do that, I just want to take us to look at stress. Because so many people use the word stress, hand it around, and it does affect us. But what is it? We're experiencing more of it with the complexity, with the turbulence, but also the constant sources of information we receive, or constant expectations around us. And there can be a sense that we have to be constantly on. But what's really important is to distinguish stress from pressure. Pressure is the environment we're in, and what's around us. That might be the deadlines, it might be the coronavirus, it might be things that are happening with the family. It's the things that are around us. Stress is actually how we react to that environment and see it, and how we create unhelpful or negative thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Not everyone will react the same way. And so what is driving some people to react well and some people to react less well? Well, CCL have done some research on this, and what they've brought to light from many is that stress is actually created by rumination. Rumination is thinking about things that have happened in the past or might happen in the future, which are beyond your control. And so when you ruminate, you churn over these things. It often creates emotions. It often creates physical body sensations, as we'll go on to in a moment. But it's when our mind is wandering into the future or into the past. And the problem where it becomes really difficult and creates health issues is that we can often exaggerate these stresses in our minds. That we have a bias towards negativity. It stems from that fight or flight response that seeks to protect us. But actually, in our current environments, it's not often that we're actually in a dangerous position, but we are being bombarded with information. And even in traumatic events, which are really, really difficult, the research and what George Banano asserts is that events are not traumatic until we actually experience them as traumatic. Not necessarily the event itself, but it's how we experience and embody it. And if we look at what happens in the body, if we have a fight or flight experience, the body will react. So the first thing that happens is that the hypothalamus will send a signal to pump out adrenaline, and that increases our heart rate and sends blood pouring through our veins. As I said, it's great if you're in physical danger because it gets you ready to run or to fight. But if you're sitting at your desk and you're constantly flooding your body with adrenaline, then the blood supply to the arteries flows faster, our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure increases, we get more air to the lungs, and our pupils expand, and our blood glucose levels go up. And what happens over time is that it's like a river channeling through our arteries, that it will erode those riverbanks, and our arteries protect themselves by laying down plaque. And if we don't have time for recovery, then those arteries will become blocked. And that's how we get so many heart attacks, one of the leading causes of death, one of those chronic conditions created by this adrenaline and this response to the pressure that we may be under. In the longer term as well, there's another hormone that's released. It's cortisol, and that restricts inflammation and releases energy for fight or flight by putting white blood cell production on hold. And so it really weakens the immune system, and it also impedes memory retrieval and information that's already been stored. Cortisol also shuts down the part of the brain connected to big picture thinking, creativity, and risk-taking. So it's not going to help us, particularly in this environment, if we're experiencing high levels of adrenaline and cortisol over time. So what do we do about all of it? Well, the first thing is to distinguish rumination from reflection, and to understand what we're actually doing in a given moment when we have these thoughts. Because our thoughts drive our emotions, and our emotions drive our behaviour. But our thoughts don't have to be the master of us. We can be the master of our thoughts. So if we want to do this in a positive way, we can reflect about what has happened in the past and plan for the future. If we go into the negative rumination, where these thoughts are flowing, we can end up with anxiety or regrets about the past, anxiety about the future. And so we're going to explore, as we go into our strategies, many methods that we can adopt to help us to be in the present and to be constantly reflecting and thinking about this positive planning and reviewing rather than ruminating.
May I suggest something here?
Yes, please.
I'm thinking that rumination is two things that come to mind. One is rumination is kind of like dreaming in while we're awake, because when we dream, we can have all these emotions and adrenalines and hormones flow. And rumination, we're not asleep, we're actually thinking about these things. And it's almost like we need to stop that bit. And the second piece I wanted to add there is, if we are leading, we have to be mindful of group rumination. We be able to counteract it in ourselves, but sometimes the group will start ruminating as a group. And leaders have a specific role in role modeling how to change that rumination to reflection. That's all.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And if anyone else has thoughts, please put them in the chat, because I know all of you are practicing leadership in your daily lives, so you're encountering this, but it's easier said than done, right? It's easier said than done. So how do we make it a reality? And so what we're going to look at next is part 2, strategies for personal resilience. And as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at mindful strategies, mental strategies, but given that the mind and the body are so connected, there's a lot of overlap between these different areas, and also with our emotions. And we're also going to be taking a brief look at the social elements, and particularly as we go into part 3 and caring for others, we'll be looking at the environment that we're creating around us. So starting with these strategies, I'd like you, and I invite you to join me as we're 43 minutes into this virtual webinar, to actually take a moment away from your screen. It helps to bring us into the present and takes us away from the screen, but it's also one of the most effective strategies identified by Nick Petrie and others, as we'll discuss later. So I invite you to turn off your video if you like to, and close your eyes. And I invite you to take a deep breath with both feet flat on the floor, and sit straight and comfortable. We're going to do a short body scan, starting with your feet. What's the temperature in your feet? Feel your toes, wiggle them. Bring your attention to your lower legs, and now to your knees. Are you noticing any sensations in your body? Now move your attention to your upper legs and your sitting bones. How do they feel? Are they light? Are they heavy? Now focus your attention on your stomach. I invite you to breathe in. Fill your stomach with air. As you exhale, scan your body with your upper torso. See if you can hear your heartbeat. What's the pace? Now move your attention to your back. How does it feel? Is it relaxed? Is there tension? Stretch it out again. And now move your attention to your neck, where so much tension can be captured. Breathe in, try to make yourself as comfortable as you can. Now move your attention to your arms. Relax them next to your body. Feel the temperature of your fingers and move them. Breathing into your belly again. Now pay attention to your face and your head. What are the muscles in your cheeks doing? Tense. I'd like to relax your tongue, relax your jaw, relax your forehead. Continue breathing into your belly. And now think about what you can hear around you. I invite you to open your eyes and look at the colours and shapes around you. Take notice of how you feel. If anyone would like to share how they feel, please do. Okay.
Every time I feel like my eyes see clearer. I don't know what it is. It's like there's a better focus all of a sudden. I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Anybody else feel better after that? Feel a bit more centered perhaps? So this mindfulness, this paying attention to the present moment, is shown by research to improve health, depression, anxiety, stress, increase energy, support our immune systems, happiness and well-being. And address for those chronic issues I mentioned around heart-related conditions. It also improves our performance, our ability to recall information, regulate our emotions, take perspectives. So it increases our...
There's a couple of comments in the chat that I think are worth noting. one person, I won't use any names, doesn't matter, at this point, said, I'm exhausted and I didn't realize it.
Okay.
All right. Another person is saying, can you help me, can you send the send this technique to us? So you're having an impact, Flora.
Thank you. Oh, that's great to hear. There's lots of apps, and we can happily share them afterwards. I got into this because I was struggling to sleep. I was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning with thoughts churning around my head. And I did lots of research, as I like to do, to find out which strategies are working, because I was doing the exercise, having a good diet, trying to take that balance. And one of the best pieces of research I came across was that, in fact, mindfulness during the day helps us to sleep, because it helps us to process our thoughts and emotions, which are often waking us up at night. And if we don't take time to do this during the day, it can impede our body's ability to restore itself during those precious hours during the night. So I personally think this is incredibly powerful. As I said, I'm happy to share more about it. So building on this, I'd like to do another short exercise, which brings together a few other strategies. And before I do, sorry, I almost forgot this slide. But as you noticed how you felt in that moment, and the state that you were in, if you're in a more centered, grounded state, impact others around you. Patrick said before this call, people can hear the smile in your voice, right? People can sense how you are feeling. They can understand, they receive your energy. Peter Mayers' quote here, I think, is very powerful. He says, state is the most important part of communication, and yet it is almost universally overlooked. Your state determines not only the quality of your communication, but the quality of your thinking. The psychological and emotional condition you're in ultimately determines your ability to lead and respond to what is happening around you. So if you think how long that meditation, mindfulness practice took, it was a matter of minutes. Actually, you can recenter even more quickly with that with your breathing, where you hold your body and you bring your attention to the present moment. But that's so powerful in leadership as well as resilience. Okay, so going on to those other strategies that I promised you I'd tell you about. So these are developed by Nick Petrie in a CC paper called Wake Up. And it is related to being in the present. But I'd like you to look at that image of the river running through a house with somebody sitting in the loft. And I'd like you to imagine that the house is your mind, and the flood water outside is all the pressures, thoughts, and emotions you face each day. You have 3 choices about how to respond. If you're in that house, you could try to deny that the river is running through. You could try to hold the door shut and pretend that none of the thoughts or feelings exist. Eventually, the door will blow open and you will be swept away. You could ruminate as your second choice. You could open the door, jump into the water, and start swimming in the thoughts and feelings. Chances are you're going to be left frantic, exhausted, and overwhelmed. The third strategy is to let go. And that is to notice that as well as a front door, there is also a back door and a loft. And if you open the front and back doors so the thoughts and stories can flow through, go up to the loft and stay detached and observe the thoughts and feelings as they pass through. So you're not getting down and tangled up with the thoughts. You're not trying to hold them out. You're simply letting them come and go. And when you do this, you're embodying steps all in once. You're accepting what has happened. You're allowing yourself to reflect, and you're letting go. So you're left with these three options: deny, ruminate, or let go. Letting go and getting perspective is also really helpful to allow us to actually take a moment to check our assumptions, information, and reinterpret situations in a more balanced way. Patrick, I think you touched on this in the first webinar, about particularly in these crisis moments, how our biases can play in, how this fear factor can play in, how we can look to the negative. And actually sometimes we need to recalibrate and just take a stock check of where we are and what is actually going on. Building on this, there is actually another model for letting go, and that's about what's recognizing what's within your control, your influence, and what's simply outside of your control. Covey has looked at this in great detail in 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And he builds on this, and he says, actually, we can see from research that proactive people try to expand their circle of control and influence, whereas reactive people tend to have a large circle of concern, which is like all those worries that we've talked about, all those pressures and stresses. And we can make choices about what we choose to pay attention to, where we want to put our limited time and attention and energy. Particularly at the moment, many of us may be paying attention to the news, what's happening, what different people think about different situations. But I'd encourage you to just take a check on what information do you actually need to live life and do your work, and is the rest of it actually just a bit of noise that's adding to this flow of emotions that we don't necessarily need in our lives right now. And then to really think positively about your attitude towards these things, your enthusiasm, where you're working, what you're doing, what you're reading, how you're accessing leadership positions, what you're learning through your skills, what you want to contribute and write. That can help to shift this mindset as well into focusing away from the negative and towards. So if you want to take a moment just now to actually draw yourself where you are right now on these different areas. Let's take a moment. How big is your circle of concern at the moment? Are there things that you are paying attention to you could actually let go of? What's going to help you to be most present and impactful in the things that you can influence? Okay, so we're going to now look at a few other strategies. And a lot of it related to this positivity, this positive thinking and reflection. There's a lot of research around this. As I mentioned, the moving away from rumination towards positivity and reflection supports resilience because it improves our thinking, it manages negative emotions, and in fact, looking at 293 studies of more than 75,000 people, some research shared by CCL shows that positivity produces a success in life, regardless of whether you measure success in terms of salary, health, or a satisfying marriage. And I think some ways that we can increase that positivity are to have that gratitude, to appreciate what we do have, and take note of it each day, whether it's in a diary or it's at the dinner table, trying to do it with our children. The next thing I've put there is savouring. And this is about being mindfully present, engaged with your experience of positive events. An experience I had recently was to hear that I should be more mindful of the food I eat and savour the food I eat. Because so often we eat very quickly, we're on the run, we have to do this, but actually if we are fully engaging and savouring the tastes and the smells, it's not only helping us to calm down and be present, but also helping our digestive system. Because if we're in that running mode and we're in the fight or flight mode, our hormones and our body responses are not preparing our bodies to absorb that food. So just even slowing down and savouring the food you eat can help you to enhance your digestion, enhance your resilience physically. Appraisal links to that perspective taking, but allowing you to reconsider missing information, assumptions, or new perspectives. And finally, that journaling, enabling that reflection, goal setting, and prioritization. And one thing that many people do is to wake up early and do that journaling at the beginning of the day so that they can deal with any negative emotions and really what's ahead and where they're going to prioritize that time and energy. Okay. So we also know that exercise is important. Green exercise is even more powerful at helping to decrease any stress that we're experiencing, improve mood, enhance our focus. And in fact, low intensity exercise has quite a strong immediate effect. So just going out for a walk in a local park or nearby has a positive outcome. And a number of people I know now are walking during calls. So if you don't need to be on a screen, can you do it by WhatsApp or phone? Can you be out and about? Whose meetings have to be in front of the Zoom the whole time? The other thing that Nick Petrie mentions is finding your flow activities. So these are activities that help you to really be focused on that present moment and absorbed in what you're doing, so you lose track of time. And that kind of state is helpful to transfer into other parts of our lives. So it'll be different for different people, but finding that time and prioritizing that time is important. It's also, I've got a picture of dancing there. Socializing is important. We're wired for connecting, and making it as playful and as fun and respectful as possible also helps to boost our mood and our resilience. I mentioned diet briefly. Plant-based diet is shown by the research to be more supportive to resilience than a meat diet, but I'm not going to lecture anyone on nutrition. Just put it out there. And then finally bringing us to sleep. So I mentioned that the mindfulness is actually a helpful strategy to help us sleep. I'd just like to do a quick test in the chat. How many people are getting about 8 hours sleep a night? I know it was a question we asked you right at the beginning. Just put yes or no, perhaps, or more or less, depending on how you feel.
So we have a few yeses coming in.
Oh, great.
Not a chance. We laugh at that, but we probably shouldn't. I mean, I did.
No, yeah. I laugh because I've been deprived of sleep for about 9 years with children.
Yeah, exactly. I am, but only after having changed my daily schedule, so some are grabbing it. Only on weekends. I think these are pretty representative. I mean, if I think about my life, I can see each phase of my life there. Yes, 8 hours on average, sometimes even 10. Good for you. That's good for you.
Fantastic. Well, as I've already mentioned, this sleep is extremely important because it helps us to process the emotions, the information that we receive during the day. And actually, without it, we're more likely to remember negative images and experiences, more of a skewed perspective. So it really does help with balance. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here, but many of us know what supports sleep in terms of the practical things you can do around having a routine, creating a relaxing environment, switching off from the devices a few hours before you're going to go to bed, psychologically detaching from the experiences of the day before you go to bed, alcohol, and just in case you need a reminder, this is what happens
without sleep.
Without sleep.
And there's ample evidence that everyone is very similar physiologically. It doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is. Everybody should be targeted between 7 and 9 hours a night.
Yeah. So without that, we're going to struggle. There is also research that 42% of leaders get by on 6 hours or less, which is not good, right? It's not likely to help in the longer term. So let's prioritize the sleep if we can. Okay. So now we're going to have a look at a summary of what we've just covered. So having that growth mindset, that positivity is important. Be present and mindful, don't ruminate. Pay attention to things within your control and let go of things outside your control. And reappraise the situation you're in. Journal, gratitude, positivity. Find your flow activities and spend more time doing them. Sleep. And then that social side, build that trust, support, respect, and playfulness if you can with the people around you. And that leads me into your relationship with others. So supporting resilience in others is an extremely important part of leadership. We need to take care of ourselves, get that oxygen mask on, and then we need to pay attention to the people around us. And there are some practical things that we can do. Regular check-ins, having fun or informal catch-ups, role modeling that positivity. Start a meeting by asking team members what went well in the past week and thanking team members for their efforts. Stress and pressure, it's so easy to look for the negative sides, or especially if somebody makes a mistake and it impacts on you. But if we don't tolerate mistakes, as we'll come on to in a moment, and we don't appreciate what's actually going well, we're not going to succeed together. There's an interesting suggestion here around leaving a gratitude note on a colleague's desk or sending a note via an email. Actually, this is a really powerful thing to do, but to be very explicit about what the behaviour was and how it impacted you to be useful. So it's positive feedback. CCL have lots of information on their website about SBI, situation, behaviour, impacts. This is about saying, okay, so positively, what did you do really well, or what did you do that had a positive impact on or on our work together? Okay, so those are some practical things. And what I'd like to do now is just to talk a bit more about this coronavirus situation where we have a higher level of risk. Because what we need in risk, as Patrick and Peter identified in the last session, for people to be able to take it, to be able to say or do what you really need them to say or do right now, and to not have them in fear, but to take a risk, make people vulnerable. And the definition of vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So the idea that if you speak up and you say something, that it might be criticised or wrong, or that you're bringing your whole self, you're bringing your whole attitude and mind towards this, but it's being rejected, then somebody feels vulnerable. But actually, that vulnerability is not weakness. It's an accurate measure of courage. And this is taken from Brené Brown, who's done a huge amount. One of her TED Talks are one of the most popular on the TED circuit, and she actually says that if we can be vulnerable, if we can show up as our whole selves and bring our whole ideas and creativity, that vulnerability is the birthplace of love, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. It's a source of hope, empathy, accountability, and authenticity. She has much more to say on this topic, and I encourage you to look into it if you haven't already. Making our colleagues feel safe and able to say what they need to say.
There's a couple of things that just popped up in the chat, and I won't take too much time, but they're really good. I haven't been able to catch everything that's going by.
Sure.
I apologize to people who haven't I haven't picked up on, but this right here, one person is saying that as a manager, I found gratitude, really, really helps. It works wonders. And then right after that came a comment that says gratitude or showing vulnerability is highly dependent on the context, i.e. the organizational or national culture. And so I think that those are really interesting juxtapositions. Of course, showing vulnerability in the wrong place is going to create some unexpected results. I think one of the messages that Fleur is trying to say here is that from the risk research that we've seen and from the bonding research that we know, we might want to question our assumptions about stepping into vulnerability because we may overestimate the negative consequences of that. And that's not to deny the textual, but it's hard to be vulnerable, and it's not unusual when we say this that people say, well, it really depends. Of course it does.
Of course it does.
Yeah, and we defend against it. I'm not saying this person who said this is defending against it. It's just, I would encourage us to think about it and its cultural sensitivity.
Absolutely, and I think it's also important to distinguish slightly that emotional regulation and being able to respond appropriately to a given moment. But if we deny our emotions completely and don't give permission for people to say how they feel about something, then we can shut them down and they can't give their full selves to the situation. Okay, so building on this idea of creating a safe environment, because whichever bigger context you're in, you do have some influence over your immediate environments in the way that you choose to role model behaviour with others. And Amy Edmondson has built a lot of research around psychological safety. And essentially, what we're trying to aim for, particularly at this time, is this learning zone. It's a certain time. And if we are in an anxiety zone where we can't speak up, but we have a high level of motivation and accountability, over time, that's not going to build resilience and that's not going to build success. Some people might be in a comfort zone where they feel safe, but they're just not motivated. And some might be in an apathy zone. But to get to that learning zone, we need both the high motivation and accountability and some psychological safety. So how do we build it? So Amy Edmondson identifies 3 behaviours. So firstly, she says we should be framing this leading as learning. We should be acknowledging our own fallibility and mistakes. So if we role model an element of that vulnerability, that's powerful. And then curiosity. So again, this feeds into earlier concepts we've talked about around challenging our assumptions. Be curious. Try to find out more. So I hope that side is helpful. There's going to be one more person that I'm going to share with you their research, and that is by Professor George Kohlreiser from the IMD Business School in Lausanne. And he talks about the importance of a secure base. Okay? So a secure base can be a person, so it could be you, or someone you know. It could be a place, goal, positive goals, object, that provide a sense of protection, safety, and caring, and offer a source of inspiration and energy and daring for exploration, risk-taking, and seeking challenge. If we do this well, it's linked to that safety and motivation. If we do this well, then support others to fulfill their potential. This diagram might help. There can be a tension at play here, but both are possible. Okay, so what I invite you to do now is to actually share with us, do any of you have an experience of a secure base? And what is it? So if you think of a climber taking a risk, it might be you, it might be one of your colleagues. What could act as a secure base for them? If they're trying to scale this rock face, if they're trying to overcome these challenges, do you have, or if you're trying to do that, do you have a secure base? What is it? Any thoughts in the chat?
We're not getting any. I think the question is a hard one. When we say something could be a person, a place, a goal, or an object, can you give me an idea of how a goal could be a?
Yeah, absolutely. So having a positive goal that you can work towards can develop that positive mindset where you're thinking about what is possible. It gives you some boundaries that you're working in. And so you've got some structure, and it enables you to step out into chasing that goal. An example that Professor Kohlreiser gives is one person who swam across the Atlantic, no mean feat. And he had a couple of secure bases. So one was actually the legacy, the memory of their deceased parent that they wanted to honour. And so being so closely bonded and attached to that person, they were inspired and determined to swim across the Atlantic to honour their memory. And then they also had somebody waiting on the other side who they desperately wanted to meet to propose marriage. And those goals, those people kept that person going through pain, through exhaustion, and through the most challenging physical environment they could have put themselves in. And so
that's interesting. What we're seeing in the chat now is there's three that have come up that are speaking more about colleagues or people or connection. Two about colleagues, a seasoned colleague. Another about their children. They provide them. So, and in your story, I asked about a goal, and you provided me a combination, which I think was very telling about what this secure base actually is. It's kind of, it can be a blending. It was both the goal and in this
people behind it. Yeah.
In the swimmer, it was people, somebody at the other side, love, that kind of thing. Someone has said, my experience in life is giving me my secure base. I think that's a pretty powerful place to be. I could say that I find a secure base in my experience. Anybody else in the chat, anything else that comes to mind as a secure base, you know, as we're seeing? Love to hear some more.
I think particularly as we're trying to build teams or organizations that are dealing with this uncertainty, having that sense of caring, whether that sense of belonging is incredibly powerful, and having a goal to focus on, as I said, gives that motivation, gives that structure. And even if those goals have to move slightly over time, we do need to know what the end vision is.
I found the notion, I do find the notion of a secure base abstractly really appealing, and trying to make it happen or trying to actually identify it or build it is challenging. The idea of, I look at my family too, like others are saying their children. it's nice to have something that I find security sometimes in consistency, and I think that's what I have in my family, because in my work and my world it seems so unpredictable, but my family is predictable. We're all growing, of course, but so for me there's a dimension of where, you know, where can I recharge, how do I recharge, what does that secure base need to be for me to recharge. And that is this kind of predictability somewhere in my life. And that
Absolutely,
helps.
yeah. And for some, that place might be, you know, your secure base, maybe your sanctuary, right? It may be a natural environment, or it may be a religious place where you go, and there you can recenter. There, you know, it's always there for you. It's always supporting you. Their faith, their religion, but that sense of.
I think that's a really good point, and I haven't really thought about that. But when I look at what Kohlreiser has done, where he talks about a person, place, goal, or object, you just put in faith, you just put in spirituality there, and I think we should add that, and we should let the good professor know. He might be thinking about that being an object, but you know, I believe a belief system or something. But I think what you did is really powerful there, Fleur. I think that those who find a secure base in spirituality and faith, and we don't talk about that much because it can be a point of tension. And
Yeah.
but we're talking about our personal selves. We're talking about where we find it, where I find it.
Absolutely.
If I find that in a belief or in a spiritual space, so be it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good point. I think we need to modify what we say. This is note to self.
Thanks, Patrick. Well, we're always learning and growing ourselves, so we don't have all the answers, but we try to share what we've got. So we're going to start to wrap up, and I'm going to actually hand over to Patrick, because he's been listening while I'm in the woods. I'm in the middle of the trees. He's hopefully able to see the horizon, and this hopefully captures a number of elements that we've touched on today. And thank you very much for engaging with us. And I'll be here for any questions at the end, but I'll hand over to Patrick.
Thank you, Floria. I particularly appreciated both the way you have braided or woven between people who have said some good things and have some good theories, and then asked us to practice those. The things that stand out really are nicely formed diagram. Some things that came to mind while you were speaking is how, and I'm just picking one for sure, you grab this moment of savoring, and there's a moment of time, there's a feeling of time in savoring, even though we don't necessarily have it. We slow it down and savor the moment. And I'm wondering if anybody has any ideas about how can we savor the moment. Fleur said savor the meal, or the food, taste the food, and when I expand that, it's the meal time. Anybody have any ideas about savoring the moment? Is there any, just throw one idea out. How can we savor a moment? Any ideas? In the chat. So there's something that I think we all recognize, that when it happens, when we really have that moment of recognizing the present, whether it's because we like a wine or a particular food or a celebration with our family, this notion of savoring, I think, was, for me, Fleur, one of the most powerful of everything that you said. There's a lot of ways to get there. In this diagram, we talk about gratitude, and we talk about reappraisal. I'm not sure how the diagram works there, but this moment of savoring was really powerful for me.
I just add on that, savoring. Yeah. So when we had a previous session on the secure base,
yeah,
actually said, could it be a moment? And I thought that was also another powerful dimension, because if something that you experience gives you that whole body sensation of feeling, thinking, that is so powerful and precious, and that gives you the courage to go on, and you keep going back to it, then why not?
You're triggering something there. And you'll find it surprising coming from me, and we'll not say why. But I think prayer does that for some people. They savor the moment. I'll leave it at that. Meditation is another way, and the cross between prayer and meditation. Okay, but this moment, this grabbing the moment, and then maybe even having a practice inside of it, where we go back to making the meal. I think of people who really enjoy cooking. Making of the meal is as much as eating it, or in fact, the sharing of the meal is as much the moment as eating it. So I think savoring is something to work on there. It's one of the most powerful I saw. Another piece was this notion of separating stress from pressure, so that we can therefore reduce the amplification that pressure puts on our internal state, stress. So there was a piece there that I think is really powerful to consider. You asked me to sort of highlight the things that stand out for me, and so I'm doing that. These are not the most important of what you said, but they stand out. I'm seeing something in the chat says there is a technique of 5 things you see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing that you can taste. So I've heard of this technique, and it's a way of savoring the moment, I guess, if I'm hearing Miriam correctly, is that if you want to grab the moment, if you want to be mindful, then think about things you can see, things you can touch, things you can hear, and things you can smell, and things that you can taste. That will bring you to your senses clearly, both metaphorically and literally, and that will help you savor the moment, I think. I think that's a really good piece of advice. Going back to this mindfulness, to this stress and pressure piece, sometimes we say it's really stressful outside, and I really like the way you said, no, it's stressful inside, it's stressful inside us. There's lots of pressure outside. That helps me separate some things. And the goal here that I like the way you started out was we have to recognize this is maybe these practices and strategies of resilience are a way to stretch further but not snap. It increases our flexibility without our fragility. And there are things that we often overlook that are very simple. Very fundamental, I should say, not simple. Fundamental is our connectedness with others, as well as our sleep and our care for self. So you brought out caring for self as much as caring for others. And I think in particular in this space, we can do a lot of caring for others and miss caring for ourselves. And so I thank you for those kinds of things. I think the summary that I would like to add before we open it up perhaps to others to chime in is that resilience really is a set of practices. It's not a set of behaviors. It's a set of things that we have to go back to: sleeping, savoring, gratitude, making contact, sleeping, getting actually the set of practices. I love the word practice rather than habits or behaviors. We truly can get better at them. I can get better at sleeping. I have done that. I can get better at exercising. I can get better at many of these things. So when we think of resiliency as a set of practices, then they're accessible to everybody. They're changeable and growable. And we can also then begin to monitor or encourage them in our teams. This notion of what kinds of practices can do for our teams. So what we want to do in the end here, because we have about 2 minutes, is ask yourself to put down in the chat, what is your commitment to yourself based on what you've heard today? Is there one commitment you can make to yourself based on what you've heard today? And if you would put that in the chat, we'd appreciate it. After that, we have a couple of questions we'll ask, and then we'll go. So in the chat, is there one commitment you can do to yourself? That you'd like to share? Commitment I'm making to myself is to learn to savor. Savor moments.
Savor moments. Taste your lunch every day. Absolutely. That's my commitment, to taste the food I'm eating.
Okay. We're not getting that many shares, so that might be private or other reasons. But we're not getting shares, at least not showing up on mine. One is to take a break, taste my lunch every day. I like it. A savor moment there. Yeah, take a break. Respect my time and the time of others. So there's something common about time in both savor and respecting time. There's something about the moment. There's something about respecting time, the impact that time has. All right, I think what we can do, wake up every morning and think of a positive thought. So something, not of the tasks or work, but take a moment to pause for a positive thought, something you're grateful for. So there's gratitude. Good luck, Miriam. Thank you.
Should we launch a poll, Patrick, before people start leaving?
Yes. We have a poll we'd like to ask you about this webinar and what we're doing. And so Renzo, could you launch the poll? And then if you can take a quick moment to answer it, we'd appreciate it. With that, I want to thank you, and I know Fleur thanks you, and Renzo thanks you for all. And personally, Fleur, thank you. You did a great job. I really learned a lot. And so if you would answer the poll, we appreciate it, and we wish you all the best. Savor the moment. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. All the best. Take care and be well.
Yeah.